So very good evening to you all. So far, we have discussed about the agency theory, and we also, in the agency theory, we talk about the different issues pertaining to the agent and the principal conflict. And we also identified that there are three major pillars of cost, the agency cost. And that includes the monitoring cost, the bonding cost, and the third cost, which is literally impossible to make it zero, is the residual cost, which is the cost which makes the which leaves a lot of room for the agent, because the agent has the information asymmetrical advantage. And in the Anglo-Saxon settings of the companies, in the the Anglo-Saxon basically means that the English law countries, because the principle are very diffused and dispersed, they're not as big or as strong or as influential as we see in the European model of stake of the corporates, which basically means a small number of big shareholders. They are found in Europe, whereas in the Anglo-Saxon settings, especially in the US, you have the large number of small shareholders. And that is why it is very difficult to put a check on the overly exceeding powers of the agent. So that's why I use quite often this phrase that the agent has the last laugh. So that is why the agent can become super powerful. Today I was one of my students was showing me a case company, FedEx, and he was asking me that, Shab, why it's so that we were looking at the board of directors of FedEx, and he was saying that why there is a chairperson of the company and the CEO is the one person. It's very difficult to comprehend this thought that the chairperson and the CEO, these two titles are vesting in the same person. But in US, it is possible. So see the situation that in the US, on the one hand, the CEO is already very powerful, and secondly, the CEO himself or herself can also be the chairperson of the company. So it basically sounds that in the US, the CEO of the company can be so powerful, the agent can be super powerful. Whereas if you see the European model, which is the German model or the banking model, we see that here the CEOs are not as powerful. Okay, but at the same time, if you look at the American law, the Security and Exchange Commission, which is the apex body which checks which keeps control on and monitoring of the financial markets in the US, is very strict as well. I mean, the amount of disclosures that you have to make to get your company listed and to continue to trade publicly, that's a huge formality, and that's very complicated process as well. So, but anyways, whereas in the European model, some of the principles can be very powerful. So much so that there can be intra-principal conflicts. There, in typical American model of companies, there can be a conflict or potentially a conflict between the so-called parent, the agent and the principal. Yeah. But whereas in the European model, there can be a conflict between the big shareholders and the small shareholders. So that's why I use the phrase that there can be intra shareholders conflict. In the typical American model, there is a inter-stakeholder conflict, because CEO is one stakeholder, principal, the shareholders are one stakeholder. So I would use the phrase inter-stakeholder. But in European companies, there can be intra-stakeholder conflict, because by the way, the shareholders are the same stakeholders, but the shareholders may have their own diversity also. The big shareholders, the institutional shareholders, the big individual shareholders, the big institutional shareholders, the big promoting families who started the company from the scratch, those shareholders. And if you look at those small shareholders, those who buy, who are the retail traders, individual shareholders, their utility function can be so much different from one another. So in the European model, there can be this kind of horizontal conflict. Horizontal means there can be conflict between the same category of shareholders. Whereas in the Anglo-Saxon settings, the problem of the conflict is more vertical because there is a conflict between the principal and the agent. So anyway, the agency problem is persisting, whether you are working, whether you are experiencing the Anglo-Saxon model, or you are experiencing the European / banking / German-Japanese model of corporate ownership. So this is, now we move on, and now we go to the second. So this was some kind of preface of this topic so that you can relate agency theory with the stakeholder theory. The stakeholder theory is comparatively a recent phenomenon. It started developing in 1970s more scientifically, and it includes that it basically a negation of a very categorical sentence that the shareholders are the owners of the company. They are the real owners of the company. The agents only work to satisfy the utility function, to satisfy the interest of the principals, which principal means the shareholders. But this theory, the stakeholder theory, is negating this fact. It says that, hey, stop saying that the shareholders are the only owners of the company. The shareholders are the stakeholders, no doubt about it, but they are not the only stakeholders of the company. Employees, they invest their career, whole life. The environment is very important. After all, you are not running your operations in a different planet. So if you are spilling the affluents and all the wastage in the lakes, in the soil, then the environment would bear the brunt. Not the environment would bear the brunt. Environment would make the living difficult for the other people. I mean, if you have some chemical, if you have a factory and you are throwing all the toxic wastage in the lake, and people who are living nearby, the only source of drinking water to them is a lake water, they would die. Their generations would be, they would be born with deformities. Already there have been some, situations when there was some environmental hazards or some accidents, and people, generations and generations are they are born with deformities. I know one thing. It was in 1984. There was a big, there was a company called Union Carbide, and that company had its operations in a very big city in India called Bhopal, right in the middle of the country. And not only in the middle of the country, but the factory was located right in the middle of the city. Right in the middle of the city. American company, Union Carbide, producing hazardous chemicals. Don't know what happened, gas leak or whatever happened. There were thousands and thousands of people who died overnight. And not only that, people who became crippled, who became, or you can say the life was not normal for them. And even those kids who were born were still, taking birth in that city. that problem with the eyes and the skin and the physical deformities, they are quite often. So the point I'm trying to make here is that environment is a very big problem. There had been similar accident during the same, I don't know exactly the year, but I think it was in Russia, in Chernobyl plant when this thing happened, and it was a catastrophe. Then we saw in this decade of 2000, was it 2010, 11? I don't know exactly, but I can find out. This Gulf of Mexico thing happened. I think I discussed in one of the last lecture as well. And now we are seeing what is happening. So you can see that how the environment play a big role and how this affects the local communities of these business operations and the customers, of course. Customers are very big stakeholders of the company because they spend a lot of money in buying your products. And if your company is not doing a good job or the company has some, it's found out later on that the components which you are providing in your products, they are defective, they are faulty, and that's not something what you promised. Then that could be a big backlash. So the customers are very important because they are giving you the main revenue source, and the suppliers. So there is a complete chain, there is a complete ecosystem of the different stakeholders who are playing an active role in the entire supply chain. And of course, the government. We live in democracies, and in the democracies, the role of government in setting the rules of the business operations are very important. Regulations, what are do's, what are don'ts. The corporate governance report is basically based on all the principles that the government want the companies to adhere with. Okay, then taxation. Those companies who are doing a good job for employees, environment, local communities, they have good reputation. The government can give them some subsidized loans or even loan waivers, and they can get a lot of support. And on the contrary, if you're a company which has some bad reputation and you have some other issues, then the government will not be so generous to you. So the idea is that when you see a modern day company on a larger picture, on a larger canvas, you would tend to believe that no doubt shareholders are still very important. They will always be important because they are the one who are investing in the company. But we need to go a little bit beyond the shareholders. We can't be myopic in our mindset. We have to go beyond it. And we need to recognize that the modern day companies are big, they're complex. They're not only impacting employees, environment, local communities, customer, supplier, government of one country. They are doing it for the multiplicity of the countries. So I think we discussed last week also when I shared this link with you that how big the companies, not only the big is not a thing, how complex the modern day companies are. So we can't turn our back towards these stakeholders other than the shareholders, investors. So that is something, a little bit of the background of this theory, and this idea of was more popularized during 1970s because that was the time in the first couple of decades, 40, 50, 60, that was a time when the global economies were growing. America was the automobile industry in Japan, in the US, flourishing. Nobody would talk about environment then. The Gulf countries, the oil suddenly was discovered and they were becoming very rich. The whole planet was considered to be an industry, production. That was the buzzwords. Nobody was interested in these kind of things. But then suddenly, at that time, the researchers, the planners, the policymakers, they realized that, hey, this situation has to end somewhere. This situation has to end somewhere. Okay. I remember when I was in India, I was 16 year, maybe 17-year-old, something like that. Yeah. We had a trip to the Himalayas, and I met some Brazilian, and actually me and my friends, we happened to be in some organization of environmental protection. It was some kind of mountaineering institute, and then so there were many people sitting, and I just overheard a conversation that I'm talking about mid 86, 87, I think. And then I heard this conversation that India is already very late in terms of protecting its environment, ecology. They use these words, sustainability, environment, ecology, and I never heard those phrases before. So much so, I was so intrigued that I approached that Brazilian group of scientists, and I asked, hey, could you please explain, if it is possible for you, that can you explain this word ecology, sustainability, and so on and so forth. So for me, at the age of 17, those words were new. Okay, so, and see how in the life has changed in the last 30, 35 years. So this is some a bit of background, but not a bit of background. I spoke a lot. Yeah. So another thing about the stakeholder theory, that many people believe that it's not a theory. It's a mixture. It's an aggregation of different conceptual thoughts, because stakeholders are so many that you can't make a one theory which includes employees, environment, local communities, customers, suppliers, and I'm not even including all the stakeholders in this example. So it's literally impossible to make a theory which would be incorporating all the stakeholders, because many of the stakeholders are also in conflict. If a company is making a lot of investments to raise the lifestyle and make the water, the forest clean, because the company feels that that the company itself may cause some toxic waste to litter. So to stop it, they want to do something for the environment, and that can push the cost up. And if the cost goes up, maybe you charge more price, and the customers will not be happy to pay more price. They will find some cheaper alternatives. You know, we always have this kind of obsession to find the cheaper alternatives, even though they're so toxic and they're so, you know, they are so hazardous, even for the users also, not for the people who make them, but also for the users. Okay, I think if and when this whole COVID thing will be over, we all, in whichever category we fit in, we have to change our mindset. I think this is this whole COVID thing. I'm slightly going off the tangent. This whole COVID thing has given us a chance. I think this whole COVID thing is a chance given by planet Earth to all of us, that hey, you guys, it's a last chance. Behave yourself. So maybe we will not get next chance again. Yeah. So coming back to the stakeholder theory, I would say that I use sarcastically this word conceptual cocktail, that it's a mixture of different concepts. It's more like a cocktail than a theory, because it's very difficult to form a single theory which can satisfy all the stakeholders. The stakeholder literature come from different disciplines. I just took some examples. Well, it come from philosophy. Many old, schools of thought, they say that the role of environment and the stakeholder is coming from philosophy, because it's been part of the many societies since millenniums. It's coming from the literature of ethics, how we should behave, what are do's, don'ts, morality. Political theory, because after all, we are living in the modern day nation states, and a lot of political tangents, political angles, they play a big role in making certain stakeholders happy and others unhappy, and likewise. Economics is very important, because economics is often blamed. It's very easy to blame. Yeah. that the economics has to revolutionized. So there is a change in, we need to find some alternative economics. Law is very important. How strong is law? Organizational social science. So all these different disciplines, finance, economics, politics, law, organizational sciences, and so stakeholder theory, and also the not to forget also the hard sciences like physics and other, chemistry, biology, botany, zoology. So all these sciences, all those hard sciences, all those natural sciences, along with the social sciences, along with the humanities, these the stakeholder theory basically is including everything. Rather, it's a good question to ask what is not included in the stakeholder theory rather than asking what is included. So it's a very, very umbrella term, which is a good thing because you can get the ideas, thoughts from multiple angles, but at the same time, it's very challenging to form certain concrete theory. So whatever level of stakeholder theory that we have, it basically says that the companies are so large and their impact on society is so pervasive, so deep down, that they should discharge, they should perform their operations accountability. They should be accountable to the society than ever before. Okay, stakeholders other than investors. So stakeholders, not just investors. I shouldn't say other than investors. I should rather say that including investors. They hold a stake in the modern day companies. So definitely, if you have a stake, when you get your job, you have a stake in the company, because if the company doesn't work well, the company can close down. You may lose your job. You may lose your, that can bring a blot on your career also. So you will not like to start your full-fledged career by working in a company which becomes bankrupt after a few months you join. So you would not like to start your career like this. So that's why this is, everyone has a stake in the, so just like investors, they have their financial share, equity. Same way, all the stakeholders, they have their share. The share can be financial, the share can be non-financial in the company. So the broader view of stakeholders include the future generations also. So I would say that not only the existing human beings or flora and fauna which exist today is a stakeholders, but those kids who are not born yet, those plants which are not grown yet, those forests which are not grown yet, those flowers which haven't blossomed yet, that snowfall which hasn't fallen yet, even though we had a lot of snowfall today, even that is included, or that should be included, arguably, according to the broader view of the stakeholder theory, and the animal species and the environment and everything, and the seawater and whatnot. So this is the broad view. That's why I said that it's more important to ask what is not included in the stakeholders theory. Certain definitions, if we move away from the macro view to more research-oriented view, the Donaldson and Preston, they have done a lot of work in this theory, stakeholder theory. They argue that the essence of stakeholder theory holds that the stakeholders are persons or groups with legitimate interest in procedure and substantive aspects of the corporate activity. They are well recognized, so they are only talking about those stakeholders which are recognized, and they have a lot of interest. Interest means they have a lot of stakes in the company's running, what's the procedure, and if there is any activity and the activity has a result, has an outcome, has some fallout, they're also affected by it. But the problem with this definition, to me, it seems to be that it only includes those stakeholders who are distinct, who are unique, who are identifiable already. But it doesn't include those stakeholders who maybe aware of. It only include those stakeholders, very identifiable, but it doesn't include. Maybe you when you call stakeholders, that doesn't all the stakeholders. And my second problem is that it only talks about the persons or the groups of people, something like that. So I think we should also think beyond the human being. This, for example, this environmental disaster. It's not just if the fishes are dying, if whales are dead, if the coastal line is full of the oil spillage, right? Then it's not just persons. Of course, persons are also affected, but we should go beyond the human beings, and we should also include those stakeholders, which I call as even the future generations, animal species, and the ecology. According to stakeholder theory, we need to bring some acts of the company. We need to bring some accountability to the acts of the companies and the responsibilities so that the interest of the stakeholders can be safeguarded. And often, the stakeholders' interest can also come in conflict with one another. So we have to do the conflict management when we have the inter-stakeholders or intra-stakeholder conflict. But how to make this balancing act is a very vague concept. So many critics of the stakeholder theory, they are saying that stakeholder theory doesn't seem to be, or the stakeholder theory is only full of fantasies and full of saying that do this thing, do that thing, but it doesn't explain the nuts and bolts that how the different stakeholders' utility function can be maximized and how the conflict between the different stakeholders can be minimized. Okay? Otherwise, if you don't address these issues, then the problem of the agency cost can also creep into the stakeholders' interest. So you are making one group of stakeholders richer, happier, satisfied, and the second group of people we are making poorer, sadder, and dissatisfied. So that way we need to be very careful that what are the pros and cons, what are the cost benefit of the activities which are done in order to maintain the balance between the interests of the stakeholders. When we know that the stakeholder is not a one-term, stakeholder doesn't include one entity, the stakeholders including multiple entities. Some are human beings, some are non-human beings, some are living, some are not living, some are born already, some will be born in the future. So in the middle of very complex propositions, the stakeholder theory is only telling us what to do, but it doesn't tell us how to do. That's a problem. If you look at the next slide, you see that the stakeholder relationships are basically the exchange relationship. I mean, what you contribute, for example, taxpayers are the stakeholders of the company because they pay their money. And then the government is spending this money for the industrialization, for providing companies with the social infrastructure. So basically, the stakeholder theory is a network, is a complex network of the relationships, economic, social relationships of different stakeholders with one another. So that's why you can rather call stakeholder theory as an ecosystem in which different stakeholders, they exist, they persist, they interact, they supplement, they also conflict with each other. They make some contributions, they also be the beneficiaries. They are doing some act, they get some inducements. Those acts which can be harmful in the larger interest, they are dissuaded to do. Those acts which are beneficial for the overall society, for the societal welfare, they are given inducements, they are given encouragements, so that the companies, they don't think that they have a absolute leeway. So they also know that they are not the profit-making machines, but they are also the corporate. They're like citizens. Like if I'm a citizen, I have my rights and duties. I have the rights, but I also have my duties. The problem in the modern day conversation is that when I see some political debates, everybody's talking, all these so-called champions of human rights, I shouldn't say, all these things, they are only talking about in terms of rights. So they are ignoring a very important thing, that when you talk about the citizenship, when you talk about the nationality, when you talk about the, when you believe in that you're living in the nation state, you need to behave like a citizen. And the citizens have the rights and the responsibilities. If you only talk about the rights and you don't talk about the responsibilities, then it's a problem. These days, I've been watching a lot of debates in India, and I know that a lot of people are dying because of the bad policy of the state. But everybody's talking about that what state should do, what rights people have. But nobody's talking that how people could have used their common sense. You know, the state will not go to everybody, every household, and tell them how to behave. If you're not wearing mask, if you're not using sanitizer, if you are going to the places where there are thousands of people and you don't even care about infection, and you think that this corona is a hoax, it doesn't exist. If you behave like this, then I'm afraid it's not a very balanced discussion. So it's like we need to behave like if I commit a crime, if I do something wrong, I would be accountable to the court, to the law. But if my rights are infringed by somebody, I also have the redressal to the court. So it's like a game. It's like a transactional relationship. That if I do good, I get a pat on my shoulder. If I do something wrong, I get the punishment. As simple as that. But the problem is that the modern day debate, when I see, I'm not sure if you have noticed that, all the discussion is based on, the basic premise of the discussion is my rights versus your rights. Nobody talk about that, hey, your responsibilities are coming in conflict with my responsibilities. So the entire narrative of the discussion and debate is so one-sided. I stopped watching that. So yeah, so the corporations, considering their size and complexities, they need to know that, hey, we are not just corporates, we are corporate citizens. And if we have our operations in 150 countries in the world, then our citizenship is not restricted to one country. Our rights, responsibilities, our contributions, our do's and don'ts should be based on those different societies in different countries. Okay. So there are some of the I won't say sub theories, but some of the propositions of the stakeholder theory is that there's a classical and a pure profit making view, and this view is saying that the business has the lower standards of ethics than society. and they don't have any social responsibility other than obedience to the law. So this theory is, you see what, you can ask me, Shab, why did you mention even this theory which has no application in the modern world? I mean, except autocracies, or except some very, how to say, some 13th century states, no country would be following this theory. But it's very nice. It's very important to know the dirty side of the of the viewpoint also. So that it's very important that you see those views which you, on the face value, feel angry or frustrated. Because that anger, that frustration, that unhappiness would make your commitment even stronger to do good, to induce good things, to think about responsibilities, to think as a collective stakeholders, to keep your stakeholders' conflict away and work in the larger societal interests. Okay? But according to this theoretical proposition, I will not call it a theory, but it's more like this is a very old-fashioned, maybe 14th century point of view, which says that the businesses definitely have the lower standards, because in businesses, some people even say that you cannot be a successful business person unless you know how to cheat, because a lot of lies, a lot of untruth statements, lots of manipulation, lots of things you have to do, which if you see them from the moral standards, the generic moral standards, they are not very good things, but it's some kind of accepted norm that in business, a lot of competition, rather cutthroat competition, rather negative competition. And in the middle of that competition, then the companies only want to enhance their success at any cost. They can do anything. So that's why this viewpoint is that the businesses often have the lower ethical standards than the overall average society. They are not accountable to any corporate social responsibility. They don't have to do, because they are already doing. They do it. Come on, they pay taxes to the state. It's a state whose job is to do the all this welfare scheme. The only thing, the only moral thing the companies need to do is to follow the law of land. That's it. So according to this very archaic, unacceptable theoretical viewpoint, is that since the companies are following the law, their morality is ending here. That's it. Okay. Right. And then we have these are part of this pure profit-making theory. And here, Lantos has published a very important article in 2001. And it says that some degree of dishonesty is acceptable, because we know that everything is fair in love and war. And business is no less than a war, and love, of course. You have a lot of competition. So some kind of misstatements, knowingly, or concealment of facts, or even exaggerations, or putting the things under the carpet, at the back burner, and exaggerating and giving the wrong statements or fudging the data is acceptable, because everybody knows that it's more like a norm. It's acceptable norm in many societies or in many countries. So therefore, if one company is doing it, it can be a problem. But because if you are living in a business culture where these things are very much acceptable, then it's not a problem. Okay, deception is a necessary component. This theory assumes that intelligence, innovative ideas, they are not so important. But if you can deceive somebody, that's a good idea. And that can make the company successful. Business people should only focus on their business ideas. They shouldn't be their business lives, their professional lives should not be having anything so-called ethical standards. Of course, in their personal lives, they can follow all those ethical or the religious or the moral standards. So in the personal lives, they can do worship, they can be very honest, they can be very nice people. But hey, don't put any burden on them when they are in their business lives. So this is the point of view. And then comes the neoclassical school of theory, which says that we are living in a free market economy. Your success depends on how economically efficient you are, and your end performance, the result is how much profit you have earned. If you have earned more profit than last year, you are successful. And where we are living in a free market. I think this theory also makes a mistake that it should say free market, but not free for all, in the sense that we cannot call indiscipline as a freedom. So if you look at the neoclassical literature that we have seen, Marshall, all the literature which is written in, I would say, 18th century, 19th century in the economics theory, that was all neoclassical and economic efficiency. There was one assumption that if you want to have a free market economy, then there should be least interference by the state. So state should only be a kind of silent spectator. And if anything wrong is happening in the economy, if people are doing some violations, well, as long as it's not a legal crime, you shouldn't worry, and let the Darwinian law prevail, the survival of the fittest. So if there is a competition, if there are many competing firms, let the most efficient company win the war. And how they win the war? When they have maximized the profits, they squeeze the profits, and then in the free market, there's no rule, and they are totally decimating their competitors, throwing them out of the competition, so that the most efficient company exists. So this is something which the neoclassical theory needs to be criticized when you see from the stakeholders theory point of view. They even go to the extent that pursuing the socially responsible objectives may actually hinder the corporate performance. You distract them. Hey, these people who are leading the companies, they are great minds. They got fantastic ideas. Let them implement them. Don't bring them. Don't distract them by talking about the corporate social responsibility. Don't talk about the stakeholders' benefits. Don't even mention that you are adding poison to the water which people next door are drinking. Hey, you are stopping them from performing the very important job. So I'm trying to sound as cynical as possible, but I want that you guys should think that this kind of literature, this kind of line of thinking exists in our minds. I won't say that it existed. I would say that it even exists now. Yeah, so this is something which is, and then the second point of view is about the constrained profit-making view, which basically means that the companies, all right, this is a little bit more disciplined, all I can say. I will not read slide to slide, but this viewpoint, because the first viewpoint, which is called classical or the pure profit-making view based on the neoclassical theory, this has been criticized now. And it says that, hey, profit-making is still the most important objective of the companies, but there should be some constraint. There should be some, look at the word constraint, means some accountability, some responsibility. Companies shouldn't deceive, they shouldn't commit fraud, they shouldn't misstate, but in the given system, they should continue to flourish, they should make profits, let them compete based on efficiencies. Let them maximize the profits. Let's talk about a little bit accountability thing. But still, the corporate leader should focus on expanding their market share, selling more, earning more profits, the bigger market share, these things. So even though this theory assumes or accepts that, hey, you know what, enough is enough. We can't commit frauds, we can't deceive, we can't cheat people, we can't misstate, we can't what's the word? We can't do the data massaging, but we need to be responsible, but only to the extent that we don't break the existing law. But otherwise, all those freebies which the neoclassical theory allows you to do, please help yourself. Yeah. So the requiring managers. So even this theory assumes that don't tell the managers that they should talk about the pursue socially responsible objective, because they managers spend money out of profits which belongs to shareholders. So how can you invest, rather spend, or rather waste the shareholders' money on the corporate social responsibility? Because the money doesn't belong to the managers. Managers, according to the agency theory, are only custodians of the profits which belongs to shareholders. They should decide. So give the profits back to shareholders. Let them decide if they want to do some socially responsible things in their personal life or not. And the crux of the argument is that, hey, state is a better, rather the best institution to address the social problems. I think the companies should only focus on the specialized. So there should be division of labor and specialization. All the role of welfare, taxing people, spending on the public welfare, on the infrastructure, ethical things, giving pensions to the employees, and if they need some insurance, having a social welfare system, all these jobs should be done by the state. But what is the purpose of the state then? If the state is not doing this job, why should the CEO of the company be bothered about this debate between what is ethical, what is unethical? Let them earn profits in the free market system, and let those profits go to the shareholders. Let the shareholders decide if they, in the private life, if they want to do some charity, let them do it. Okay, yeah. Because if you are not doing it, if you are forcing the corporate leaders to do these things, which should be done by the state, then you are jeopardizing the basic tenet of the free market theory or the private property system, because that is the essence of capitalism. That the enterprise, there's a freedom of choice, and at the same time, you have the right to the private property. So nobody will come and take away your assets from you, because it's not going to be nationalized. Let state do things which don't poke your nose into the matters of the state. If state is not doing welfare, ask state. Don't ask the CEO of the company how to behave. And then the third view of the stakeholder theory is that socially aware view. Now we're getting a little bit more humane. The first view was extremely, profit oriented. The second view is at least recognizing something that, hey, at least don't cheat, don't tell a lie. But now we are getting things more and more mellow. The business should be sensitive, not responsible yet, only sensitive. See, look at the word, sensitive, not responsible yet. Business should be sensitive to the potential harms of its actions inflicting on the various stakeholder groups. Okay, so the company shouldn't, the company should not only consider its shareholders when making the decision making, but also give some weightage to anyone. So that it doesn't even call them stakeholders, but says anyone except shareholders. You can also consider them if they are affected by any business decisions. If thousands and millions of anyone's have died because of drinking poisoned water drinking or eating the toxic food. Of course, then it should be some weightage should be given that we don't do it next time. Am I sounding really horrible or sarcastic? Yeah. And then we discussed about that we have the primary stakeholders who are very visible stakeholders, like investors. And by the way, investors include two types of, we have two types of investors, the shareholders and debt holders. The shareholders are those, not debt holders, yeah. The shareholders are the one who are risk-taking. They may have huge profit, but they may have loss, but even lose their investments. But the debt holders are also investors in the company, but they are giving the money on the fixed rate of interest. So the risk element, the risk-taking of debt holders is comparatively lower than that of shareholders. But combined, I can call them investors. I don't have to explain what is employer, what is customer. And the secondary stakeholders could be those who are affected by, and I think the society at large, the local communities, the group of people, or even the vegetation are included. And then we have the mute environment stakeholders, natural environment. The nature is comparatively mute, but if it is angry, then it doesn't remain mute at that time. You can hear the sound of those tsunami waves. Yeah, but on a given time or a given date, the natural environment is a mute because it doesn't speak. It doesn't speak English the way we do. And then there are some absent stakeholders also, like for example, the future generations, or as I said, that in some parts of the city which I mentioned, that where this gas leak, and the kids which are born still taking birth in that city, they are they still have those health issues, rather serious health issues. Yeah, so that is the problem with the stakeholder theory. I think we discussed before that it's difficult to bring them into one umbrella and call it stakeholder, and also how to bring the non-human groups into the discussion and the debate in this, or the whole discourse. That is also, I think there are many many environmental groups, many Greenpeace and all that stuff. I think they are more like they have some own political agendas. So I will not even call them that they are representing any non-human group. Yeah. So these are some of the problems which are very visible, very obvious. How to recognize the future generation, how far, 100 years, 200 years, 1,000 years, we don't know. And this is some kind of the overall scheme of stakeholders: the firm, the closest, the zero in, the zoom in, and the immediate stakeholders are communities, customers, employees, and suppliers, financiers. And then if you go a little bit out, you can also see the government is a big stakeholder, competitors. If you do something wrong, then it also affects the competition. So your actions or inaction can also impact your competitors positively or negatively. If you are a company, do something silly and you fail, then your company customers can move to that competitor. So they are very happy because you lose, they win. But sometimes you lose, they also lose. If you are an oil company and you are adding poison in the water and you are caught, then many people would believe that, hey, this person is caught. But all these other companies in the same business, they're also doing the same thing. I will give this example to you soon when we talk about maybe the next few slides. When this company Enron failed, it was an oil company, the energy company, not oil company, the energy company. not Enron. I'm talking about the BP, the British Petroleum, which still exists. Yeah. When this company was alleged that it has done a lot of environmental harm in Gulf of Mexico, and many customers, they lost many customers. But the loss of BP was not the gain of Total, Shell, or the other oil companies, because people started believing with that one example of BP's environmental this calamity, that all the oil companies are doing the same thing. And as a result, not only the BP's share prices went down next day, but basically all the oil companies, they suffered a lot. So sometimes your wrong deed can be the gain of your competitors, but sometimes your loss is also a loss of your competitors. And then we have the media. Media is very strong, but yeah, sometimes irresponsible. And the other interest groups, there can be Greenpeace, environmental groups, there can be human rights groups, there can be some ethnic minority groups, and the consumers protection groups, some, all those these new fashion words you can bring in the discussion. So these are some of the stakeholders. So if you want to have a quick chat, I can. So the one thesis or the one main argument of the stakeholder theory, the modern day, the improved stakeholder theory, not those very ideas of the business bluffing and stuff, but the modern day stakeholder theory is that the theory is unarguably descriptive, which means that it tells us what to do and what not to do. So many times we are confused that, hey, what we are told to do is not having the same results that people have elsewhere. So in many ways, the stakeholder theory, the modern day stakeholder theory, is a checklist. So you're ticking, I'm doing this thing, I'm doing this thing, this is good, this is bad, this is not good. On a scale of 1 to 5, I behave in this way. So it's more like a descriptive theory. Okay. Managers, they are not required to make any explicit references to the stakeholders' welfare, but many of them, they are following. If you look at when you start working on your company's annual report, if you type the phrase stakeholder, welfare, sustainable, you will see many points where you would see that the modern day companies are also not altogether missing the bus. So they are also doing, sometimes they make reference, clear reference, sometimes they make explicit reference, sometimes they make implicit reference. So I think you should develop a set of, all of you should develop a set of some keywords, including welfare, sustainability, ethics, responsibility. So these kind of things, if you type them, these words one by one in the PDF of your, the annual reports, you will find many references that where sometime very clearly it reflects that the managers are doing to enhance the stakeholders' welfare. But even sometime you will find that the companies are not making so much of noise. They should actually make more noise. The stakeholder theory influences practices. So the legal opinion, the business judgment law. So in many cases, you can see that the legal system of the country, I just gave the example of the USA, but in many countries, the stakeholder rights are recognized, again, explicitly or implicitly. So much so that in many countries, in Germany, basically Germany, it's not Germany per se, it's the German corporate governance law, that you can see that the companies which follow the German style corporate governance, they have not one board of directors, they have the 2 boards of directors. The first tier of the board of directors is including the company executives, and the second tier of the board of directors is including the stakeholders representatives. So where you have the representatives of some employees, representatives of the customers, of suppliers. And if your company is potentially causing any danger to the environment, then you also have some representatives of some Greenpeace or NGOs on your board of directors. So you are hearing the voice of the not just the financial voice, but also the non-financial voices as well. Yeah, so same way, these are just examples that, for example, in Britain, require companies, directors must include the interest of the employee. So all these, if you look at the legal system, these are just example, and we have even more current examples. If you see the legal system of different countries, you need to include more of the stakeholders. So it's not just a voluntary thing, but somewhat binding. But my thesis is that still, until this COVID thing, many of these legal provisions were not so rigidly, so strongly followed. There has been still a lot of room for tweaking them, to tampering them. So I think now the legal system has to come forward with more sharp teeth and with a whip that, hey, it's not a matter of your choice anymore. You need to not only follow, but you also have to show the results of these new provisions. So make it more mandatory. Don't leave it to people. If you have, they will never do it. I believe, you know what, it will be a PR exercise, nothing more than that. The stakeholder theory, the second thesis of the stakeholder theory is that it's instrumental in nature. So it connects that if you do something, so there's a cause and effect relationship. That if you, so the one bad argument could be that if a company is doing more on corporate social responsibility, if you are investing on innovation, company making more sustainable, then your profits can go down. So don't do it. Well, but that's the one view. But we also have another view that if you are doing innovation, you're spending on R&D, you are trying to make the company sustainable, in the short period, your profits can go down, but in the long run, your profitability will go up. So everything is basically cause and effect relationship. And I don't remember at the back of my mind now, but I can give you some literature if you want, if you're interested, that there has been some latest studies which shows that all these expenses to make the earth more livable or company more sustainable, they are not in conflict with the profitability. In fact, the most responsible companies in the world who behave really well, they are also more profitable companies, most profitable companies in the world. If you look at the most profitable, most sustainable companies, if you just Google most sustainable companies in the world, you will have a list. And you will find that they are the same companies who are having tremendous amount of profitability. Not one-off profitability, but very stable profitability. So they are growing not in zigzags, but they are following a very, very steady path of growth. So it's difficult to say, rather wrong to say that the stakeholder adherence would jeopardize the company's profitability. No, it's other way around. It's a very old-fashioned argument. Yeah. In Finland, for example, where I live, unlike many countries in the world, here the law is more binding on following certain practices. That, hey, this is not sustainable. You can't do this thing. If you do it, there'll be punishment. And the companies, in many cases, are following the adherence to the sustainability more than the average companies in the world. But all these companies in Finland, those who are doing it, they're also profitable. There's no conflict between profitability. And then the third thesis is that there is a, we believe it or not, but it's a stakeholder theory is more like a normative. And why shouldn't it be normative? Normative means when we include If you want to ask me what is normative, I would say that any theory which contains a lot of this expression is normative, or shouldn't be. Should be this, shouldn't be this. Okay, so that way the fundamental premise of the stakeholder theory is normative in nature, which is fine. I don't see any problem with that. Somebody has to tell you that, yeah. And this is something which I want you to explore by yourself until we meet next week. I can give a quick snapshot when we meet next week about it. Next week when we meet, I really want that we should spend some time together in the beginning discussing about the stakeholder theory that we did today. And then we can have some quick discussion about the stakeholder theory in the light of Enron. Okay, just Google this or YouTube this company's name, Enron, and you will find tons and tons of information. You must do it. It's an example in 2001, actually, yeah. If we had learned from this lesson of Enron in 2001, maybe many of these corporate embezzlements and all those bad practices, they could have ended already. But the problem is that the history repeats itself, but we never learn from it. So here, I explain the impact on different stakeholders in the light of this case company Enron. So please check what was wrong with Enron. And if somebody reminds me by emailing in the next few days, I have very interesting articles, what happened in Enron, and I can share with you. It was a complete failure of stakeholders' interest by a leading company in the US, or rather in the world. Maybe it was the fifth most successful company in the world at that time when it bankrupted, just with the blink of the eye. So please go through it, and then I would have some discussion. Maybe we'll have a bit longer session next time. And then we discuss the resource dependence theory, which will not take much time. It's really small, very short theory. And then I would give you one example of a case company. And I'm not sure which one, maybe Finnair or BP. And then we will discuss all the theories together in the context of one case company. So with this, I close today's meeting. So thank you so much if you for participating in the lecture. But we couldn't have much discussion today. But next week we will have more discussion-oriented session, and the session will be longer next week. So much.